Hello there, thanks for watching and I appreciate you. This is a video in a series of videos showing you how to make a custom character controller that uses rigidbody physics, Cinemachine cameras, Unity's new input system, and custom player gravity. In the last video, we installed Cinemachine, configured a third-person camera and the Cinemachine brain, added a camera collider, set up collidable and transparent layers for the camera collider to interact with, and increased the default minimum gamepad dead zone to eliminate drift. Today, we're going to set up a first-person camera and an orbit camera, create a camera controller, and implement a method of changing cameras. Okay, let's first get started by adding our new cameras. We'll start by going to the top here, under the Cinemachine tab. We'll create a virtual camera, and we'll create another one. We'll drag both of these in the hierarchy panel, underneath our camera's empty game object. This is really just for organizing purposes. And the first camera, we'll go ahead and we'll rename that to first person vert cam. And our second camera, we'll go ahead and rename that to orbit vert cam. With the first person vert cam selected, we'll go over to the inspector panel and we'll configure our first person camera. We'll set the priority to 20. For the follow, we'll go ahead and we'll drop down our player all the way till we find the camera follow empty game object. We'll go ahead and select our first person camera again, and we're going to drag and drop our camera follow to the follow. For this camera, we don't have to worry about the look at, we'll leave that blank. For the body, drop this down, we'll choose third person follow. We can set all the damping to 0. We can set the vertical arm length to 0. We'll set the camera side to 0.5. It's actually not going to be used here, I just want to go with a median value. And we'll set the camera distance to 0, since this is a first-person camera, after all. And then if we skip down to the aim section, we can just drop that down and choose do nothing. For this camera, it's not a third-person camera, so we don't need a collider. So we're actually done configuring this camera. Next, we're going to configure our orbit camera. In the hierarchy panel, we're going to select our orbit vert cam, which we created earlier. And now in the inspector panel, we'll just go through just like we did for the first person vert cam, and we'll configure it. For the priority, we're going to set that to 30. For the follow, we're going to set the camera follow, and we're also going to set the look at to camera follow. In the body, we're going to choose framing transposer, and we can leave all the default values. If we scroll down, go to the aim section, I'm going to select the drop down, choose POV, point of view. We're just going to change these speed values. We're going to decrease them a little bit so it's not so fast right out of the box. And we're just going to change them to 200 instead of 300. Under extensions, we're going to add a collider. Same as we did in the previous video when we set up our third person camera. We're going to select everything for collide against. Under transparent layers, we're going to choose movable. And for our camera radius, we're going to set that to 0.2. We're also going to select pull camera forward under strategy. And you know what? We're actually, for this one, we're just going to uncheck avoid obstacles. We'll just give it free reign. Under add component, we're going to click that. We're going to do a search for Cinemachine in. And ultimately what we want to find is Cinemachine input provider. We're going to add that. The player index can be left -1, that's fine, that's for single player games. If you had a multiplayer game, depending on the player index, you would change that value to this programmatically to match that player's controller, so you can choose which input you want. This is just going to allow us to control this specific camera with the new input system. The Z-axis we're not worried about, all we want is the X and Y. So we're going to hit the little dot to the right here. And we're going to choose our humanoid land/look input. And with that, the orbit vert cam is configured. We have quite a few things to take care of yet. Let's handle the actual player input next. We're going to have to set up some keys so that we can press a button and change the camera. In our project panel, under Assets, Scripts, Input folder, we need to double click on our Input Actions. If you remember this, it's pretty straightforward. All we need to do is we need to add a new action. If we right click in the Actions panel, we can add a new action. We're going to call it new action, ChangeCamera. For the action type, we want a button. The initial state check we don't care about because this is just going to be a button press. It's not going to be one that we hold down. As before, we're going to need 2 bindings, one for our keyboard, one for our gamepad. So, next to the new action we just created, we're going to click the plus, click Add Binding. For the first binding, we're going to go to Binding Properties, drop it down, go to Gamepad, and you can choose whatever button you like. I'm going to choose the right stick press. And for the last binding, select it, path, click the listen button, and I'm going to press the C key for camera, or change camera, on my keyboard. And here it'll pop up, click C, keyboard, and with that we're done here. And click Save Asset. It's going to load for a second, and we can close the Input Actions panel. With the new Input Actions added, in the same input folder, we can open our humanoid land input script. In our humanoid input land script, we're going to add a new Boolean variable. I generally call them the name of the action, and then at the end, I'll add was pressed this frame. With that added, we can scroll down. Under on disable, I'm going to add the update function. In this new update function we just added, I'm going to take our new Boolean variable, and I'm going to see if it was pressed this frame. With the new input system, you can simply take an action, and you can call this function to see if it was pressed this frame. If it was pressed this frame, it will return with true. If it was not, it will return with false. We can save our script, and we can go back to Unity. Okay, now that we have our additional cameras created and we're listening for the input from the keyboard and the gamepad to change the camera, we can now go ahead and set up our camera controller, which will actually change our camera. To start doing that, we're going to go to our hierarchy panel, right-click, create empty. We're going to call it camera controller. Now in our project panel, we're going to go to scripts, controllers, right-click, create, C# script, and we're going to call this camera controller as well. Back in the hierarchy panel, before I forget, we're going to select our camera controller game object, and we're going to take our script, our camera controller script, and we're going to drag it into the inspector panel. So we add the script to our game object. It's easy to forget that step, so best to do it while you're thinking about it. Back in our project panel, we're going to double click our camera controller script to open it in our editor. To start, we're going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. We're going to add using Cinemachine. Sometimes when you add using Cinemachine after just installing Cinemachine, and you try adding it to your script in this way, it'll give you an error. It'll say this doesn't exist or something like that. To fix that, you need to go into Unity. You need to go to Edit, Preferences. In Preferences, under External Tools, you'll need to regenerate project files. Sometimes you'll also need to uncheck local packages, and then regenerate, recheck, regenerate. But usually you can just click regenerate project files without messing with the check marks, and that will solve your problem. Okay, that's done. We go back to Visual Studio. At the top of the camera controller class, we're going to start adding our variables. Okay, now with our variables created, we're going to go ahead and create the start function, as well as the update function. And we're going to create one more function. We're going to call it ChangeCamera. And I lied, we're actually going to create one more function. Alright, we're all done typing that up now. Let's go ahead and review what we just typed in. So as I mentioned before, we start out with our variables. Our first variable is a using all-real camera, and we're setting it public. It's a Boolean. Initial value is false. We can get it from anywhere, but we can only set it within this script. Next, we're linking our input handler. After that, we're creating a variable to store a Cinemachine virtual camera within. We're creating an integer, calling it active camera priority modifier, and it's just a random large number. I'll show you what this does in just a second. After that, we're also creating links to our main camera, our first-person camera, our third-person camera, and our orbit camera. We're actually not going to use our main camera right now, but I have an idea for the end of this video that you might find interesting. So we start out right away calling the ChangeCamera function. This is so that the first time through we can set our default camera. And then every frame, we're checking our input handler for the ChangeCamera was pressed this frame boolean. If this ever comes back true, then we're going to call the ChangeCamera function as well. In the ChangeCamera function, we have a simple if-else loop. Basically what we're doing is we're going through. If Cinemachine, well, let's just say first of all we come through and active camera is not set yet, right? Because in the start function, we're calling ChangeCamera right away. So here we come down ChangeCamera, active camera is not set yet. So the if and the else ifs are all going to return false. So we're going to come down to the else statement, which is for the first time through, or if there's an error. We're going to take our Cinemachine third person camera, we're going to take the priority for it, and we're going to add our active camera priority modifier, which again is this number up here. So we're going to take the current priority, whatever it is of the Cinemachine third person camera, whatever priority we set by default, and we're going to add that ridiculously large number to it. We're also going to set our third person camera as our active camera. This way, whenever we go through the update loop and we press the change camera button and we call change camera again, this time through our active camera is going to be set. If we press it once and our Cinemachine third person camera is the active camera, we're going to come through and we're going to set our camera priorities. Our old camera is going to be, or our current camera is going to be our Cinemachine third person camera, and the next camera we want to change to is our Cinemachine first person camera. Let's go down to our set camera priorities function and review what that does. In the set camera priorities function, we're expecting two Cinemachine virtual cameras, the current camera mode, and the new camera mode. We're going to take our current camera mode, we're going to take the priority of it, and we're going to subtract from it our active camera priority modifier. So we're going to take that modifier away from it and return its priority back to normal or default, whatever we originally had it set to. And then likewise, we're going to take our new camera mode and we're going to increase the priority by that modifier. And then we're going to set our active camera variable to our new camera mode. So we effectively just reset our current camera, we took our new camera, and we made it the active camera. Going back up to our code, for this specific camera, which again, we're changing from a third person camera to a first person camera, we are not using an orbital camera. So that is going to be false. Real quick, I do see a bug here. In the next if statement, we are switching to the orbit camera. For the orbit camera, we're setting using orbital camera to true, obviously, since it is an orbital camera. But then in the next one, when we're changing back to our third person camera, we're not setting it back to false. I forgot a line. We need to add that. There. With that added, we technically don't need this using orbital camera equals false up here, since it's only being set true here and false here. But if any other cameras were ever added or anything like that, it just makes it a little more verbose, a little more obvious what's happening here, and less prone for errors or bugs later on. So I'm going to leave that here for now, but you could technically remove that and everything would work just fine, as it is now. Again, this is pretty simple. If you're just going from the third person camera to the first person, from the first person to the orbit, from the orbit back to the third. By default, we're using the third person camera. Do that, and that's it for the camera controller script. Go ahead and save that. There is one more thing we need to do, but I'm going to show you that later. First, let's go back to Unity. In Unity, in the hierarchy panel, we're going to select our camera controller. Under the camera controller script, you'll see all these fields we need to set. We need to link our input handler, our main camera, our first person camera, third person camera, and our orbit camera. With that set, we should now be able to play the game. There is going to be one bug though, I'll point that out when we get there. Alright, in the game, go ahead and bump into this real quick. I'm going to press the C key. You can see we're in first person. I'll press it one more time for our orbit camera. And this is where the bug's going to be. So we're using the orbit camera right now, and with this orbit camera, you'll notice we're not actually orbiting, we're still going forwards wherever our player is facing for the most part. The camera is also going to turn towards. You can see they're actually out of sync with each other. I'm going forwards and my character's actually going off to the left a little bit. Anyway, we don't want this happening. What we want is the camera to simply orbit and the player's going to always face the direction he was facing when we change to this camera. So what we want to do is we want to disable the look and rotation input for our player and just allow it to work for our camera. To do that is very simple. That's why we added that boolean. Go ahead and stop playing. We'll go back to Visual Studio. We need to go over to our humanoid land controller script. In our humanoid land controller script, underneath our input, I'm going to create another serialized field. I'm going to call it camera controller. Now we're going to scroll down to fixed update. We're going to add an if statement. And that's all we need to do. So basically what we're saying is if camera controller is not using an orbital camera, that's what the exclamation point means, is not using the orbital camera, then we'll go ahead and we'll get our look input and we'll make our player look and we'll pitch our camera. In case it still isn't quite clear, we'll go back to Unity. What's happening is with our orbit vert cam, if you'll remember, go ahead and switch back to that. In the inspector window, down at the bottom, we have Cinemachine input provider. This is actually getting our input for the camera itself. So in addition to getting input for our player, we're also getting input for our camera. We don't want that to happen. We just want one or the other. So we stopped getting input for our player when we are on this camera. Let's go ahead and play the game and see what happens now. And before playing the game, I forgot to add the script reference that we just made. So in our player humanoid land controller script, we need to take our camera controller and add it here. And now we can play the game. So in the game now, knock these over real quick, hit C for first person. Here we are in first person again, hit C again for our orbit camera. Remember, we are facing forward. If I press forward, we will continue going that direction, regardless of which way I face the camera. So it is effectively an orbit camera, it is orbiting around our player. So with that fixed, we can go ahead and change a couple other things, make this a little nicer. If I press C again, change back to our third person. And once again to our first person. You'll see our first person's about halfway up our player. That's not right. Our head and eyeballs are probably not in the middle of our body. So let's fix that real quick. If we come up to our hierarchy panel and we click on our camera file object, all we gotta do is move that up a little bit. Because if you remember, all of our cameras are looking at and following our camera file object, right? So wherever that is located on our player object, that is where our camera is gonna focus on. So let's go ahead and let's just move that up just a little bit. 0.8 is probably going to be a good number. As you can see, we're much higher now. If I press C again, go to orbit camera, again go to our third person, again go to our first person, you'll see that we actually go in about head height now, where our eyes actually would technically be on a human. So that's fixed. I don't like how slow the transition is, that's a little slow for me. So let's go to our main camera. These are some settings I skipped over last time. You have a bunch of options here for your default blend method. If you click here, you can do a cut. You can do linear, ease in, ease out. Let's just change this to 0.5 for now. Half a second instead of a whole second or 2 seconds. Press C again, and you can see it's much, much faster now. Great. Stop the game. And with that, we're pretty much done. You can now change the camera between a third person, first person, and orbit camera. We separated the controls between the orbit camera and our actual player controls. There is one bonus thing I'm going to throw in at the end here. I found this as a result of a lot of Googling. If you end up Googling for this thing, you're probably going to find the same thing. It's a little complicated and a little dirty. If anyone knows a better way of doing this, maybe there's one nowadays, please let me know in the comments below. I'm all ears, that would be great. Otherwise, this is how you hide your player's layer. Say for example you're in first person mode and you can still see parts of your player and you don't want to when you're looking around. This will allow you to hide your player. So to do this, we're going to first go to our player game object in the hierarchy panel. Under layer, we're going to add one. We're going to call it player self. Click out of that. We're going to assign the layer. Oh, not to our ground, to our player. You got to be careful where you click. No, just to this object. We're going to go to Visual Studio. We're going to go back over to our camera controller script. Under ChangeCamera function, we're going to add a couple lines here. Okay, and that's it. So basically what we're doing is, whenever we go to the first person camera, we're going to hide our player self layer, which contains our player's body, basically. And then when we go to the next mode, which is Cinemachine Orbit, we're going to unhide it. The way we're doing this is we're taking the culling mask and we're doing a bit shift to basically truncate the variable or to move the numbers where we need them to be in order to disable and enable them. It's a bit dirty, it's a bit complex, I'm not going to get into these very much, but there it is. Again, I found this on Google. I don't know who to give credit to without searching for it, and frankly I'm just way too lazy. If someone wants to post it in the comments, I'll add it to the video description, but there it is. Alright, let's head back to Unity, and if we play the game, now, when we change the first person, you're going to see our player completely disappear during our transition phase. And when we turn back to orbit, he'll instantly come back. Again, if I press it, you'll see him instantly disappear. And he comes back. So, our disabling of the layer that our player is on is working properly. If you want your player to not disappear right away during your blend mode because you're using a blend mode and you refuse to use a cut, then you could just add a delay, for example. There's a lot of different ways you could handle this, but there's the code to actually disable and enable. A simple way of just getting away with that cut that's kind of ugly right there is to just simply go to your main camera, and again, under blend, we're going to change it to cut, which just means as soon as you press the button, it just cuts to the next camera. It's just instant. Oh, and I forgot to change it outside of play mode, so our player went back down again. Gonna change our camera back to 0.8 high, and we'll save it, play it again. Okay, our player should once again be tall. Let's find out. Here in the first person, looks like we are taller than the box now. That's great. Looks like everything is working properly. This is our orbit camera. Notice that since we disabled collisions on the orbit camera's collider, we will not actually collide with the ground or anything else anymore. I like having it this way for development purposes so I can see what I need to see. You can always re-enable collisions later when you need to. So yeah, there you have it. First person, third person orbit, and third person cameras. So with that, I think this video is done. Thanks for watching, and in the next video, it's going to be a shorter one. We're just going to go over zooming the camera in and out and setting camera zoom limits. If you're feeling generous, leave a comment down below. I want to read what you're thinking. Let me know if you have any questions or recommendations. I'd also appreciate very much if you liked the video. And if you're feeling extra generous, it'd blow my mind if you subscribe to the channel. Being new to this and putting these videos together takes a lot of time and effort. Thank you for any and all participation and support. I look forward to continuing this in the next one. See ya.